Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Sports Legends of the Carolinas. I'm your host, Scott Fowler, the sports columnist for the Charlotte Observer, where I've worked since 1994. And after doing this job for nearly 30 years, a lot of times I get the question, who are the people you've enjoyed interviewing the most? In this podcast, I try to answer that question by returning to some of those people for in-depth conversations about sports and about life.
Title IX passed in 1972, and so they had to develop and start women's programs. I would say that there's absolutely no question that I am a product of Title IX. I believe that if Title IX had not passed, I would not have had the opportunity at Charlotte that I had.
For this episode of Sports Legends of the Carolinas, I'm glad to have former UNC Charlotte Athletic Director Judy Rose. We visited Judy in her home where she lives with her husband Ken on Lake Norman, about 25 miles northwest of Charlotte. Judy Rose was the athletic director for the Charlotte 49ers for an astounding 28 years, from 1991 to 2018. Before that, she was the school's women's basketball coach, a job she earned after serving as an assistant basketball coach at Tennessee for the legendary Pat Summitt. Under Judy Rose's leadership, the 49ers established a football program and helped host the 1994 Men's Final Four. Often an unsung hero content to let others take the credit, she has been recognized as a member of both the North Carolina and the South Carolina Sports Hall of Fames.
When you have a job that allows you to impact the lives of so many young people, you are blessed, and I have truly been blessed.
Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you're listening, and consider a digital subscription to the Charlotte Observer. Judy Rose, next on Sports Legends of the Carolinas. Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and welcome to our home.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate that. Let's start with this. One common denominator in all your work as an AD, I would imagine, is so often you were probably the only female in the room. College athletic directors, even now, is a very male-dominated field, and I'm sure even more so at the early part of your career. So what was your strategy handling that?
You know, that's interesting because you're absolutely correct in regard to being the only female in the room. And I'll never forget that I was trying to find mentors for me, and our chancellor at the time, Jim Woodward, said, well, Judy, I've got 2 female mentors for you, but they're not in sports. And he mentioned Dale Halton, CEO of Pepsi-Cola Bottling Company, and Pat Rogers, CEO of Rogers Builders. And he said, they're in male-dominated professions. It's not sports, but it's the same situation you're dealing with. Now, you're going to have to find within the NCAA some male mentors that will help you in this regard. But there were 2 national organizations at the time. One, NACTA, the National Athletic Directors Association, and one was NACWA, National Women's Administrators. I chose to go with NACDA because I'm like, that's who I'm going to be in meetings with. And the women in NACWA got very upset with me that I didn't join. I said, we can't afford to join both. I don't have time to do both. And really kind of got, I don't want to say snubbed a little bit, but they were not happy with the fact that I chose NACDA because of being with athletic directors.
And you knew who you were
I knew who
dealing
I was,
with.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not the athletic director for women's sports or men's sports. I'm the athletic director for the university, and I have to make a decision that's best for the university.
You were correct me if I'm wrong, the 3rd female athletic director at a Division I university?
That's
Is that
correct.
Right?
The other 2 were from out west, and I did not know them and didn't really interact with them at all.
And haven't you said before, tell me this story, didn't you originally, when offered that job, say you weren't sure that you wanted it? The AD job here.
I did tell you that, and it was interesting. Jeff Mullins was our basketball coach and athletic director, and that's the way we could afford to hire someone in that position. So I knew my role. I was associate athletic director, but my job was to really run the administrative part of the program so that Jeff could coach the team. And some things happened in the North Carolina system where the head of the North Carolina system said no longer can a men's basketball or football coach also hold the title of athletic director. And that decision was going to be made, and for the upcoming, there's like 2 to 3 months notice before the new academic year was going to start, changes were going to have to be made. And Jeff came into my office one day and he said, Judy, you know, I'm not going to fight this. He said, I can go play golf now and coach basketball. And he said, my salary's going to remain the same and those type things. And he said, you've been running the program. I told the chancellor that you should be the next athletic director, and I think he's going to offer it to you next week. And this was on a Friday, and I'll never forget. Ken and I lived in Harrisburg at the time, you know, my stomach was just churning. And when I got home, Ken, you know, I came in, and then he came home, and I said, I need to talk to you. And he wasn't paying any attention to me. He was going through the mail. I'm like, no, I need you to come over here and sit down on the couch. I really need to talk to you. And I tell him that, and he goes, well, hon, that's great. He said, now you're going to probably get a paycheck that's reflective of what you're doing, and that's just awesome. And I paused, and I said, I don't know if I want it. And the look on his face, he goes, you got to help me with this. I don't understand that. You've been doing the job. I said, I know, but I always had that buffer that I knew Jeff would back me on something. And he goes, but Judy, you've run every division within it, whether it be ticket operations or marketing, you've overseen it. And I said, but I don't know any other female ADs. And that after that is when Jim Woodward kicked in, when I met with him. And he said, we're going to expect you to do some things differently than we have in the past. You're going to have to raise money. And they didn't require that before because you had to coach as well as be an athletic director. And so I said, okay, I can do that. But then I was just really concerned about...
Well, what were you hesitant about? Like, what made you just because...
I didn't know any other women in it. And even though I'd been attending NCAA meetings, I knew that Jeff really held the title of AD. And I don't know why. I think it's just because I didn't know any other women that were doing it. And it just made me nervous about it. Yeah. And would I be accepted into that?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
And so I just really made sure that the most important thing to me is that I kept my value system. I wanted to be respected for being ethical and making those type of decisions. And I didn't want to be confronted with things that I thought would be inappropriate. And I just kept telling myself, you're the athletic director for the entire program. And you've got to act like the athletic director for the entire program. And you've got to make decisions on what's best for the entire program, even if you get criticized for those decisions.
And I'm sure that job comes with criticism always. There's no doubt about that. In those early years, before you had established yourself as a preeminent AD who'd been, you were on the NCAA Men's Division I basketball committee. It was a very prestigious post. I've won a ton of awards, but early... Before all that, did men ever try to railroad you, like say, just kind of, that's Judy, we can get our way, whatever, and kind of steamroll you a little bit, or not?
Not really, but I reflect back on a meeting. We were trying to get into the Metro Atlantic Conference. I think that was the one at the time, and I had to meet with all of the athletic directors at a meeting. It was at an NCAA conference, but they called a meeting because I was going to make the presentation about us changing conferences and going into that conference. And I'll never forget in the room, Bill McClellan was the athletic director at Southern Miss at the time. And he had been at Clemson. And I'd done my homework ahead of time. I'd kind of looked up each person and tried to look at the background and everything. But I'm in the room making the presentation, and he is not paying one bit of attention to what I'm saying. I mean, you read the room, because you've done this enough where you're giving a speech or whatever, and if your speech isn't too good, you're like, I got to switch over here, and they're not paying attention. Well, he was just really not giving me the time of day. And so they took a break, and I was going to come back and do some more. And so I went over to him, and I said, Bill, I said, how's your daughter Susie doing? Susie was at Winthrop. She was a freshman when I was a senior.
Oh, nice.
And she was a very good field hockey player, very good. I said, is she coaching? and his whole demeanor changed. I mean, I had him really eating out of the palm of my hand then. I mean, I had his vote. I had everything. And I said, I'm sure you probably have grandchildren by now. We're going through this whole scenario, but just bringing it closer to home for him. Yeah. And he kind of adopted me. He took me under his wing. And in meetings, he was so inclusive and just, so.
How about that?
Yeah.
Just by doing your homework early. Well, and being smart and using kind of a gentle touch as opposed to just saying, why aren't you listening to me?
Just being annoyed as I was that he was not paying attention.
Well, let's back up, Judy. Tell me about growing up. I grew up in Spartanburg, South Carolina. You grew up in Blacksburg, South Carolina. So tell me what that was like, your family. Okay. I know you had a large family, but tell us about that.
I'm one of 6 children, and my dad was vice president of a manufacturing company there, foam rubber and that kind of thing. But the company was based out of Chicago, and they wanted us to move to Chicago. My dad said, I will not raise my family in Chicago. But my mom died early, young. She was in her 46 when she passed away of cancer. So the 3 older children, I have 4 sisters and 1 brother, and 2 of my sisters were at Winthrop. All 5 girls graduated from Winthrop.
Oh, man.
I will say that.
Yeah.
But the 2 older sisters were there when my mom passed away, and my brother was at the Citadel. And then the 3 younger ones, we were 9th grade, 8th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade.
You're the 5th out of 6.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of us played sports in high school because in Blacksburg, there were 2,500 people maybe in Blacksburg. That might even be counting animals, I should say that for sure. And, we created our own fun, and in the summers we were out playing, kick the can and things till dark, and you didn't have to worry about where your kids were. You could ride your bike all over town and those type of things that you can't do today. But, and our family's still very, very close. My dad lived to be 81. And so a good upbringing in a small town. Wouldn't trade it really for anything, because it kind of helps define in your high school experience and junior high school experience, you know everybody. And actually integration occurred during that time period when I was there. And that was an interesting dynamic to follow.
And so how good of a player were you in high school and college?
Well,
I know you played at Winthrop.
I was captain all through junior high and high school, and 2 years at Winthrop of the team. I was a good player. I was point guard. I wasn't a great player, but I was a good player. And team was everything to me. And I think you learn those teamwork skills if you got 6 kids in a family. We had 1 television set, and I remember my dad said, y'all figure it out, We're like, well, my brother Talmadge wants to watch this Star Trek or whatever every day. We don't want to watch that. He said, figure it out. Just figure it out.
What did the girls want to watch in the Wilkins household?
Oh, probably Andy Griffin. And, I don't even remember back then. I'm too old to remember what was even on TV back then. That's pretty sad.
Andy Griffith probably was, that's still on today. That's small town Southern life for sure. And so then you went to Winthrop. Was it an all-girls school at that time?
It was all girls until my senior year. In my senior year, it became co-ed.
Okay, right. And you played basketball. And was that was it a scholarship program? Or
no scholarship.
Y'all were paying, you were playing, but you were also paying for tuition. Yeah. Your dad sent all 5 to Winthrop, huh?
Funny story there. When the last sister was going to be graduating, my dad got a call from the alumni office, and they said that they wanted to take a picture, the president did, with all 5 girls, since my dad had sent us all to Winthrop. He told us, he said, I can afford to send you to a state-supported school. It's a great teacher education school, and so that's where you're going to go. And so when the last one graduated and we're there, they take the picture, and my dad says, so, are you going to name a dorm after me? And the president looked at him, my dad, and he said, what? And he goes, I know I have paid for one. 5 times 4 is 20, and there were some summer schools in there. And he said, tuition and all that time period, and so the dorm didn't get named after him. But there is a brick there that I put in his name.
There you go.
There's a brick.
Right, well, good.
We'll be back right after this. Welcome back.
Were you originally thinking you were going to be a teacher or a coach or what?
Yes, I was. My plan all along was to teach physical education. That's what I was majoring in, and to coach basketball. Until I did my student teaching at a junior high school in Rock Hill, and every day was a new day for sure. And there were young people in the locker rooms fighting each other, pulling hair out. Those that didn't want to dress out in the uniform and play, just your gym uniform. And I'm like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? This is what I'm majoring in. And so I had planned on going to graduate school. And I had an older sister that was a pharmacist. And she said, Judy, you need to go straight through where Daddy will pay for it.
Oh, I see. Yes. Don't take a break.
She said, don't take a break. Go straight through. And so a lot of my professors had gotten their master's degrees at Tennessee. And so they had suggested that I go to Tennessee. And so I went for a weekend up to Tennessee and applied and got offered an assistantship, but I turned it down because in my mind, I thought, gosh, I can't imagine what graduate school is going to be like. It's probably going to be so hard. And I was a good student at Winthrop. But I was like, I just don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
That's
and
right.
I'm going to
Yeah.
that next level. And so I turned it down, but then they offered it to me again once I got there. And so I accepted it and then met Pat Summitt and Sylvia Hatchell, and the three of us were the coaches for the women's basketball team.
Did that team have scholarships?
No.
No.
At that time,
You and Pat Summitt and Sylvia Hatchell, that was a star-studded group. And you were all young.
we were all 20 to 21 years old.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean,
Right.
and we were, I'm like, they have entrusted us with all these young people and we're driving them. And I think we were pretty mature, but we still had some of the immaturity in us during that time period.
She was, did she go by Pat then? She
did.
was Pat Head.
Pat Head,
at the time, right?
And Pat had played in the World University Games.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a picture of her on Sports Illustrated by the Russian girl that was just absolutely huge. And really, it looked like David and Goliath in the picture on the cover. And we figured out that actually I had played against Pat at a tournament in Appalachian, and we didn't know each other then.
Yeah. Did she have the intimidatory style? Was she very intimidating to those girls at that age? Because
Yes.
later she became...
Yes, she did have it.
She had it even then.
She did. And Pat's one of those people that, she was not harsh in any way with language or use foul language or any of that, but she called a spade, and she wanted you, if she told you to do something, you better do it. And if you didn't, that glare was there. And, I think a lot of it came from her background. If you've read much about Pat, she and her father were kind of at, not odds over the years, but, she said that I think the only time he ever told her he loved her, he was one of those that just didn't say, I love you.
Yes.
And Pat was public about all of that and throughout her career. And so she made sure when she had a child that, he had all of the love expressions and those type things. But I think Pat wanted the kids to know she loved them. And a lot of that was through discipline in regard. And I think all her kids graduated, if I'm not mistaken. So, but I'll tell this story. It was kind of funny. We were hiring a men's basketball coach, and it was the chancellor and myself.
And this is at UNC Charlotte?
This is at UNC Charlotte.
Okay.
And we are hosting the Women's Final Four in 1996, and the regionals were being played. And I had interviewed Melvin Watkins during the day because we were going with an outside person and got some news late in the process and decided to switch over. And so I tell the chancellor he needs to interview Melvin. And he says, well, I'm going to interview him tonight, Judy. And you be close by so that you can come back afterwards. So I couldn't drive all the way back up here, so Ken and I met at a sports bar, and it was in Cotswold area, and we're watching Tennessee play Virginia, and Virginia is killing Tennessee by like almost close to 20 points when I get the phone call from Jim Woodward that I need to come back and meet. And so Ken says, Judy, I'm afraid that Tennessee's not going to make it here to the Final Four. I know you really wanted them to come and wanted Pat to be here. And I said, yeah. And I said, but don't. He goes, Judy, they'll never make up this differential. And I'm like, you've not been with her at halftime. You've not been in the locker room at halftime. Long story short, I go back and meet with the chancellor and everything. And I don't know if we've won. I mean, Tennessee had won or lost, but they won. And Ken said, I couldn't believe it. He said, you were right. He said, I don't know what she did at halftime, but when they came back out, they were a different team. I said, it's the stare.
The stare got him.
The stare was part of it.
She was scary, man, in a good way, though.
In a good way.
Yeah, in a good way.
She could really motivate kids.
Did she ever get angry with you and give you the stare?
No.
No.
I got angry with her.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. Pat was on Pat's schedule. Okay? I mean, she really was. We were supposed to go play tennis. And I'm waiting on her to play tennis. And I'm waiting on her to play tennis. And she shows up like an hour later. And I'm like, I'm not playing now. I said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. And I would call her out on it. And she'd go, Judy, I'm like, I don't even want to hear it. She said, I said, no. Because, I mean, I know her and I love her. Another example, it had been 25 years since Sylvia and Susan Phillips was another colleague. Now, she ended up being a college tennis coach for a little while. But long story short, I contacted Pat, Sylvia, and Susan, and I said, y'all, I just looked at the calendar. This is going to be 25 years since we all graduated from Tennessee. Now, we've gotten together over the years, and we've gotten together when Pat won 2 different championships, but it's been a long time. So I'm inviting you and your spouses and your kids to come up to the lake, and we'll just have a lake weekend. So we all agree we're going to do it. We agree on the date. It's 4 days before everybody's supposed to be here. So I haven't heard if Pat's flying or she's driving. So I contacted her admin, and I said, am I supposed to pick Pat up at the airport? Is she driving or is she flying? And there's this pause. I knew what was coming. I just knew it from our days in grad school. I knew it. And she goes, Judy, Pat's recruiting. I have to get back with you on that. So I waited, and then Pat phone rings, and it's Pat. And she goes, Judy, you got the wrong date. I said, excuse me? I said, I've got the wrong date. I'm hosting. And I said, and interestingly enough, Susan and Sylvia have the same date. And she goes, Judy, I'm giving a speech to Kodak, and I'm getting paid a lot of money. It's going to buy this condo for me. Help me buy this condo down in Florida. She goes, okay. She goes, so you were coming on Thursday. She goes, y'all pick me up at the airport on Friday. And so I've known Pat for so long. I'm like, okay, so we pick her up, and then everything ends up being fine.
So she managed to do both things.
Yes,
that's not surprising either. Huh. So after Tennessee, Judy, I know you were offered a couple of jobs. You ended up, though, at UNC Charlotte. I'm sure at the time you didn't know you were going to be there for 43 years, but you weren't obviously hired as the AD. Tell me about what you were hired to do and what you had to do that job.
When I was hired in 1975, the university had, I think, maybe 8,000 students. And I was hired to be the first women's basketball coach. And that was what I wanted to be. And some other things went along with that. Is if you coach basketball, you will coach tennis. Like, I can do that. And you will teach one class each semester, physical education. I can do that. And you will be over the lifeguards. And I went, the lifeguards? And I said, I don't even have my WSI. And they're like, well, you don't need a WSI to be over them. And I'm like, yeah, but I took this course at Winthrop about liability. And I'm like, I would be responsible if something happened. They're like, oh, you're going way too deep in this. And I'm like, okay. And so I did all of those jobs. And I think I was a good basketball coach. But we had no scholarships. And we had limited resources. We traveled by van, which I drove to and from the games. And my kids today, I call them my kids, my former players, they go, you kind of drove like a maniac. I'm like, what do you mean I drove like a maniac? I'm like, we had to get to where we were going and come back. And I probably did speed a little bit. I'm not sure about that. But I would drive around the parking lot during the day in my car to try to find tall girls
Oh my
that
gosh.
would be on our team.
You mean like you drive around the dorms and stuff?
Dorm
or
parking
like,
lots and all through campus looking for people coming to their cars when classes would get out. And I rolled down my window and say, excuse me, have you played basketball? And I mean, that sounds crazy. And that's one of the stories.
You said you had to play NC State once, and that was kind of a rough one.
Well, we didn't actually have to. I scheduled that one, and that was a huge mistake. So we go to NC State. Again, no scholarships with us. Now, by that time, I'm sure State had scholarships. And we just got pummeled. I mean, it was not even a contest. And I quit calling timeouts. I just wanted the game to be over with. And I'm sure my players did, because I didn't have anything new or different to tell them to do that they were capable of doing, really, from a talent standpoint compared to who we were playing against.
Right.
And I'm just like... So after the game, a reporter comes up to me that's writing probably for NC State's newspaper or whatever. He goes, so where do you go from here? I said, we get in that van and we go back as quickly as possible. And we just get there, we start practicing, is what we do. It was humiliating. And I felt it for the girls, and I'm like, oh gosh, we looked so inept. And I think, in addition to not being as talented overall, I think they were starstruck, because the arena that they played in was different than the one that we played in. And so there was a lot of first in that one. So once you get past those first, it gets better.
That's hard in every aspect of life. And so when you took this van back late at night, what did you have to do next?
I would drop each one of the young ladies off at their residence hall. And then I would drive back to the Belk gym at the time and drive into it. And it was dark and there wasn't good lighting. And I'm not going to say I wasn't scared. I was. I would get out of the van. I would have to unload all the equipment because I did not have assistant coaches or any support staff there. And I would go into that gym by myself late at night, no lights on. And I had a flashlight with me. And I would go in and go to our little closet area and get the equipment put back in there, then park the van, get in my car, and drive to my apartment.
Good gracious. Yeah.
Thank goodness times have changed.
Right. My gosh.
On a lot of fronts.
Speaking of times changing, so this is the 50th anniversary of Title IX, and Title IX has had what sort of impact on your life, would you say?
I would say that there's absolutely no question that I am a product of Title IX. I believe that if Title IX had not passed, I would not have had the opportunity at Charlotte that I had. And it's just so, I'm so grateful for that in that regard. And you and I were speaking earlier, and I think I told you in graduate school, Title IX passed in 1972, okay? But universities were not implementing it in 1974-75 when I was at Tennessee working on my master's. So the federal government came out and said, if you decide that you are not going to abide by this law that was created, we are going to take away federal funding from your university. Now, athletics wasn't getting federal funding anyway, but the university was getting federal funding. And so all of a sudden, in the year that we are graduating with our master's degree, the law is going to not only be interpreted, it's going to be enacted. And so they had to develop and start women's programs. So every female in my graduate class was offered a college coaching job in some sport. And the guys in our class were really upset. I got to tell you, they were like, John would come in and he'd go, I'm the new junior high school football coach at Knoxville Junior High School. And we're like, yay, John got a job. That went well until we all started coming in saying, I was just offered this job. And one of the guys said, this is not fair. And we're like, oh, no, don't even go there.
Right.
Do not raise that ugly head because we are going to just jump all over you. It's our time now.
Finally, you got a chance.
Finally.
Yes. But even now, I mean, do you think is it even between women? Is Title IX doing everything it should do?
No. It's not. And it is very difficult when you have the sport of football to be totally compliant with Title IX. But I think the majority of your Division I and II programs are making every effort to be compliant.
One of your great accomplishments at Charlotte, speaking of football, was instituting a football program at a school that had been an issue, a sore spot among some fans for years. And so how did you make that happen? And was there any hesitancy about doing it? Because that, like you say, it skews a lot of things. It's so expensive. There's a lot of things you have to get done. So what made you want to get football here, and why do you consider it one of your best accomplishments?
Well, interestingly enough, I was selected to be on the NCAA men's basketball selection committee. And while I was on that committee, Mike Tranghese was the chair of the committee that year, and he was the commissioner of the Big East. And he came over to me in one of our meetings and he said, "So what are you going to do with your basketball program?" And I'm looking at him not knowing what he's talking about. I said, "We're pretty good. We're probably in the tournament. We're pretty good." And he said, "No, Judy, what are you going to do? Because there's getting ready to be another shift coming down the road in conference affiliations." And he said, "And the conference you're in right now, if you don't have football," and so I'm listening to him and I'm like, okay. So I kept thinking about it. So I go back to Charlotte and I talked to the chancellor then, Jim Woodward, and I'm like, we really need to be thinking about how do we protect our revenue producing sport. And right now, our revenue producing sport is men's basketball, and that is the only revenue producing sport that we have. And that helps us support all of our women's sports that don't have a revenue source. And so he said, "Judy, we cannot do football." And so I kept on it, and before I know it, the ACC decides to expand, and they take teams from the Big East. That's when Virginia Tech and Syracuse are. And then the trickle-down effect was Conference USA got robbed, okay? So then how they were going to survive is, we really need football schools to replace the ones that left, and we really don't need the basketball schools. We don't need Marquette, DePaul, St. Louis, and Charlotte. And so we left to go to the Atlantic 10. But my whole story in this is we didn't have football. And I tried to get us in the Big East then, because I'm like, we've got a good basketball program. Mm-hmm. But geographically, it didn't fit with the mix that they were doing. But I kept thinking in my mind, football is the driving force in all of this. And so I had my senior staff and myself, 8 years before we ever started football, we started meeting off campus. And I'm like, we don't know what we don't know, because none of us have really been at a football school. So we've got to learn what we don't know. And so we started doing all kind of research. We're doing research in all of this. Well, the chancellor was prepared. We make our report to the chancellor, and we had folks in the committee that were on
recommending it, I guess.
Recommending it. And he says, "Well, I will agree to allow you to do a marketing analysis to see." Then 9/11 happened.
Oh, this was way back. Yeah, okay.
9/11 happened, and he said, "Judy, we can't do this now."
Right.
It was not the right time.
No.
So it just got totally put on the back burner. But we never finished meeting and continuing. We continued to do this and to study and learn and to see what were the NCAA rules and how was it going to affect the rest of our program and what women's sports would we add if we did this. We were looking at the Title IX ramifications, everything. And then Mac Everett, who was chair of our trustees at the time, had a luncheon meeting with the chancellor and myself. And Mac said, we met for lunch at the City Club uptown. I'll never forget it. And Mac goes, I knew why we were meeting. Mac and I were we're kind of in cahoots. Chancellor didn't really know why we were meeting. So we're meeting, and Mac goes, Chancellor, now it's time. We need to add football. And the chancellor just kind of dropped his head in his hands, and he goes, the faculty are going to eat me alive. And we're like, no, they're not. No, they're not. He said, here's what I will agree to do. I will agree to appoint Mac to be chair of a committee to investigate, sort of like do a study like we'd already done and been prepared for. And so the chancellor appointed various people on campus, faculty, athletic rep, and different entities all involved in the community. And we met, and it was not private anymore. I mean, we weren't trying to keep it a secret. And that committee came forward and made the recommendation to the chancellor and to the trustees to move forward with football. Wow. And I remember what Mac Everett said. Chancellor said, "We can't afford it." And Mac said, "You'll never be able to afford it. If you're waiting, it's just going to get more expensive. It's not going to get less." So Mac was a huge advocate for it.
Wow, I didn't realize it had taken so many years.
It did.
To make the formal announcement, Athletics Director Judy Rose.
In honor of two of Charlotte's greatest corporate and community leaders, the Charlotte 49ers football field will be named McCall Richardson Field.
You were FBS by the third year? Am I remembering that
yes.
right? Okay. Started in 2013 was your very first game.
Yes.
That must have been a big moment. Probably.
It was. And really, the first thing that we had with it was the spring game.
Oh, okay.
Spring, because that was our introduction, and we're like, okay, this is going to help us decide, do we have the right things in place? Because we did, when we decided we were going to have football, we had 6 to 7 committees that we developed. And we made sure that we had faculty members on each one of those committees. And that I was on the kind of every committee, but not, I was intricately involved in the facility committee and in that. But we had a medical facility. We had an academic committee. We had student life and how it was going to impact them, and we made sure we had all of the folks involved from the different entities on campus to buy into the program. But, so when we had the spring game, that gave us an opportunity to say, okay, parking, egress, on and off campus, are we getting people in here? It's a dry run for what we're going to be doing 3 months from now,
right? When
we have a contest. And it was packed and overflowing for the spring game.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Jerry Richardson Stadium. We'll get it booted and get us underway on a beautiful Saturday afternoon here in August. The first ever kickoff in Niner football is about to take place.
Yeah, it's been quite a success story with Will Healy now, and I was there this year when they upset Duke at that. I think their first Power 5 win, if I remember.
Yes.
That that was a magical night, kind of night you just don't get if you don't have football.
One thing football did for us that nothing else could do. We have a wonderful and highly successful soccer program. Highly successful.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
But what we were not being able to take advantage of is what everybody that has football, bring your recruits in for all of your sports on a football weekend.
Sure.
And they see all that hoopla and they participate in it and it's fun. And we did not have that dynamic going on.
You had to bring them to basketball, I guess, right?
Yeah. But it just didn't get the same effect because the tailgating wasn't taking place.
Right.
And so when we polled the coaches about adding football, they all were so in favor of us adding football. It wasn't fear. I mean, I'm sure there was some fear of, is this going to take away from my sport or whatever? Yeah. But it just enhanced. And the first year that we had football, every weekend recruits, that's where we brought them. And it just made a huge difference.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that. That's a kind of an auxiliary benefit, but huge for,
Thanks so much for listening to Sports Legends of the Carolinas. You've just heard the first half of our conversation, but there's much more to come.
I have a great product to sell, young people. And we want them to have a good home while they're here. We want great facilities for them to compete in.
For that, please purchase a premium subscription to our show, exclusively on Apple Podcasts. And for video of these interviews, visit charlotteobserver.com/sportslegends.
Thanks to those of you that helped make this career path possible and for the incredible recognition and honor. Again, I am so humbled to be a part of this prestigious group of individuals. Thank you.
I'm Scott Fowler, and this is Sports Legends of the Carolinas. This show is produced by Jeff Seiner and Cotta Stevens, and the director of audio at McClatchy is Davin Coburn. For lots more content and to continue supporting this kind of work, please visit charlotteobserver.com/sportslegends and consider a digital subscription. Connect with me on Twitter at Scott_Fowler or by email at sfowler@charlotteobserver.com. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like what you hear, please share with a friend. See you next week.